Yeah, I mean, I'll just start out by saying that I personally don't believe that there's an afterlife. And the reason that I don't think that is because clearly your consciousness is housed within your brain. We have no evidence of any consciousness existing outside of a physical brain. So if there was some sort of soul or something along those lines that existed, you know, where would it exist? I mean, you can look at somebody who has brain damage in a specific area of their brain, and they might be in a coma, or they might be, in a waking state, but they don't have all their faculties about them. So, that kind of demonstrates that your consciousness is housed within your physical brain. And so that's why I don't think that you would go on existing after your brain ceases to function properly. I don't see any reason to think why it would be any different once your body dies than before you were conceived. You didn't exist for billions of years before you came to be, and I don't see any reason why your post life existence would be any different. Um, Certainly there's different takes on the afterlife in different cultures, different religions. For example, some people think that you might be reincarnated and come back in a different form in another life. That's something that's part of Buddhism or Hinduism, and there's differing thoughts about it. But maybe if you weren't such a good person, you'll come back as like a lower life form, or if you were a really good person, you might come back as more of like a godly figure. There's also like in Norse mythology, they didn't really have as much of like a moral aspect to the afterlife. They had, things like Valhalla, and they even had an afterlife called Hell, which was actually spelled Hel. And that's kind of what lent its name to the Christian version of the torturous afterlife. Because, like Aeolus was mentioning earlier, there's really no mention of hell in the Bible itself. Kind of our idea of hell today comes from works like Dante's Inferno and Paradise Lost, and it's more of like a pop culture thing. If you actually look in the Bible, you won't see anything like what most people consider hell to be like these days. Certainly, the Old Testament, what the Jews believed, it was not anything like heaven or hell that the Christians believe in. And to that end, I just kind of want to go into why the heaven and hell of Abrahamic theology is irrational and unjust. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that a God would punish people for not believing that he exists for the 70 or 80 years they have here on earth, maybe even less. You'll be tortured infinitely for the rest of time because you didn't have enough evidence, or maybe you were just ignorant, maybe you didn't even hear about this God, and so for that, you'll be tortured forever. But as long as you believe in this God, and you apologize for any of the bad things you've done, no matter how terrible it is, then you can get to a life of eternal bliss after you die. And that just is unjust, and it's irrational. Think about something that I like to bring up a lot, especially in the abortion debate, is think about when a zygote comes into being. A sperm meets an egg, and a lot of people think that's the start to life, and that has a soul and all that. Well, at least 30% of the zygotes that come into existence, they never even implant into a woman's uterus. And so you mean to tell me that they get to immediately go to heaven without ever like being born or anything, and the rest of us are supposed to jump through all these hoops and meet all these standards, and just to get the same reward? It doesn't make sense. It's illogical, really. um, and if you just look at the concepts of heaven and hell within the frame of Abrahamic theology, it's clear when you read the Bible that heaven is supposed to exist just beyond the Earth's stratosphere. Things like Jacob's ladder or the Tower of Babel. They reach up to the heavens, and they were saying that these people were getting close to actually reaching heaven. And we've put people on the moon, we've sent robots to Mars, we've sent probes into interstellar space. I mean, clearly heaven is not just beyond the earth as is described in the Bible. And then when you look at hell, again, what little is in the Bible kind of references actually earthly places like Gehenna or Tartarus and things like that. And then if you actually were to go with the kind of mythological hell, clearly that exists underneath the earth, below the earth. And you can understand why they came up with this, because they were, looking at volcanic activity with all this fire and brimstone shooting from beneath the earth, and they were just kind of hypothesizing what must be under there. And it all kind of relates to Hades and Greek mythology, and they drew influence from that as well. And the last thing I want to mention is, a lot of people, they spend their lives kind of working towards an afterlife. They kind of waste their lives away on this promise of an eternal life after they die, and that's kind of their focus. They want to ensure their eternal fate, so they kind of throw this life here on earth away because of that. But this can be harmful for other reasons as well. I mean, you look, the Pope, I mean, just recently he told a young boy whose dog had passed away that his dog is now in heaven, and he went so far to say that, like, all creatures can go to heaven, all God's creatures can go to heaven. And that's ridiculous, first of all, because that kind of, again, it's like, okay, so you mean to tell me that all lesser life forms and human beings automatically get to go to heaven, but we're tasked with the responsibility of having to do, meet this standard in order to get to the same place. That kind of just drives home the point that heaven is there as a place of comfort for people, so that when they lose loved ones, whether it be an actual human, a family member, a friend, or like even a pet, a personal family pet, they want to feel that comfort to think that they're now in a better place and that they might be reunited with them in the future. And then another way that this can be harmful is, like, there was just that woman recently, just this past week in Kansas, who actually stabbed her 10-year-old son to death because she said that he would be better off in heaven. And obviously that's not going to be something that's a regular occurrence among people that believe in heaven. She might have even had mental issues to go along with it. But at the same time, like, without religion, without the belief in heaven, does something like that happen? Maybe not. And then, to make it even worse, you have the father who finds out about this, and then he says, yeah, I do agree that my son is in heaven, but obviously I miss my son, and this is a tragedy and a horrific event. But, again, like, he's just at a loss, he's grieving, and at the same time, he's still under the impression that his son is actually in heaven, which is the reason why his mother killed him. So, believing in afterlife can definitely be harmful.